On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, it's November 2025, and it's been 50 years since we lost the Fitz. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So, probably one of the most requested episodes I've had in a while was to do this episode regarding the loss of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, lost on November 10th, 1975, up in Lake Superior. And I gotta say, I'm always leery of doing stories about ships where I know family members of the crew who have perished. It's a tough one for me, having been a former merchant mariner and going through what they must have went through on that evening is a really difficult one. But what I want to do is an episode that honors the 29 crew members. And I can't think of anything better to do than the number one, point you in the direction of some great episodes that were done by other people on the SS Edmund Fitzgerald that I can't even come close to putting together anything quite of their level. So I'm going to direct you to those. The second thing I want to do is talk about what the Fitzgerald crew was doing 50 years ago up on the lake, and more importantly, what mariners are doing right now on the Great Lakes. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. In a weird kind of timing and coincidence, we had this story about a Canadian bulker, the 738-foot Right Honorable Paul J. Martin, that ran aground just in front of the Renaissance Center in Detroit, Michigan. The vessel was transiting from Duluth all the way out to the Great Lakes. It's actually right now in the Welland Canal, heading northbound, heading toward Montreal. The ship had a soft grounding on the U.S. side of the river. It was assisted by 5 tugs that eventually freed the vessel, and the ship has been able to continue on its voyage. Here's the track of the Right Honorable Paul J. Martin over the past 7 days. The ship was up in Superior, made that port call into Duluth, and then came through the Sioux Locks here. This is what Edmund Fitzgerald was heading to. That's Whitefish Point right there. It was heading through the Sioux Locks into Huron, heading down between Canada and the United States, and then heading up and is now at the Welland Canal. The vessel will be heading northbound in the Welland Canal and into the St. Lawrence Seaway. Here's the marine traffic information on it. She's a self-discharging bulk carrier, built back in 1973, so she's 52 years old, 31,585 tons, draws about 8.1 meters of water. Her length overall is 222 meters, just enough to get through the Welland Canal. So I never get a chance to spend enough time talking about the Great Lakes, the fourth coast of the United States, the inland waterways of both the United States and Canada. And the Great Lakes are probably the most misnamed area of ocean I can think of, because they're not lakes. I mean, whatever you think of a lake, the Great Lakes are not lakes. They're inland oceans. They are massive in both size and scale. And more importantly, they are absolutely essential for trade for both the United States and Canada. Snapshot here at Marine Traffic showing you all the vessels up and operating on the Great Lakes right now. This highlights all the U.S. flagged vessels that are identified as cargo carriers up on the Great Lakes. These comes from the Great Lake Association, basically identifying all their vessels, and you can see the amount of vessels transiting through the area. Note there are kind of 2 different models used by the United States and Canada. The Martin is a kind of traditional Canadian-built vessel that operates up in the lakes. However, Canada does not have the rules associated with the inland waterways that the U.S. has, specifically the U.S. build requirement of Section 27 of the Jones Act. So there are a lot of vessels that are up on the Great Lakes that are flying Canadian flags that are foreign-built vessels. U.S. ships have got to be U.S. build, and there's only been one new build up on the lakes in 40 years. Did a whole video on that I'll have connected right here for you. One of the things that I talked about in my recent testimony before Congress was really the need to start rebuilding ships, particularly up here on the Great Lakes. Unfortunately, during my congressional testimony, Senator Tammy Baldwin asked both representatives from Tote Maritime and the Shipbuilding Council of America about ships up on the Great Lakes. I would have loved to sat there and said, we need to be investing in this. This is a huge investment the U.S. needs to do. We need to be replacing this fleet up on the Great Lakes. Building one new ship in 40 years is, number one, not building a ship. You're building a work of art. It's a one-of-a-kind thing. You need to be mass-producing vessels, and this could help shipbuilding up in the Great Lakes immensely. So I think when we look at a map like this, we need to be looking at replacing vessels and building them up here in the Great Lakes in much larger numbers than we are. A lot of these vessels are elderly vessels. They've been around. Now, they're operating in fresh water. They have a longer life, but there is a finite lifespan for all vessels. So before I go any further, let's talk about Edmund Fitzgerald for a second. As I said before, I was going to put a video together. I was going to do an interview with a new author of a book who did it on the Edmund Fitzgerald, but to tell you the truth, it has been absolutely hectic and crazy for me, so I have not been able to do that. But instead, what I really want to focus on is 3 good videos that are out there on YouTube that I think you should take a look at. The first one is done by the Steamship Historical Society of America. This is an older documentary that was done entitled The Mystery of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And while it's older, it's still an excellent one. I think it's one of the kind of the traditional ones you'll see out there. It definitely hits all the major points and talks about the events. Next is one done by Casual Navigation. Now, if you don't follow Casual Navigation, you really should. Excellent videos put out by a mariner talking about issues really in the weeds. More importantly, his graphics and his video quality is absolutely outstanding. And he did a video about SS Edmund Fitzgerald, specifically why the ship split in half. The ship obviously has been located. There was very little difficulty in finding the ship in the Great Lakes, but the ship broke in half and is in 2 distinct parts. And so he goes into detail talking about that. And then the one I probably recommend the most is this one, the Edmund Fitzgerald Mystery. This is done by Maritime Horrors. This one was done 4 years ago, 5.2 million views. So obviously very popular video. I think it's a very well done video. I think it talks a lot about all the issues associated with the Edmund Fitzgerald. Was it the hatch covers? Was it the ship striking bottom? What is it that eventually led to the loss of the vessel? I said I wanted to honor the 29 crew members who died on board Edmund Fitzgerald. So let's talk about the Great Lakes in its context as a maritime environment for global trade. Great Lakes, very, very difficult area to navigate. One of the most interesting things about the Great Lakes is to navigate on the Great Lakes, you need pilotage for the Great Lakes. For example, Great Lakes Maritime up in Michigan. When you graduate from the Great Lakes Maritime Academy, you don't just get your unlimited tonnage license, but you also get pilotage for the Great Lakes, which is really, really important. One of the unique things about the Great Lakes is how high above sea level they are, almost 600 feet above sea level, meaning as you come from Lake Superior down onto the lower lakes, you literally do come down. You have to be stepped down. So you hit the Soo Locks coming out of Superior into Huron and Michigan. If you come out of Lake Erie into Lake Ontario, you get to step down the Welland Canal onto Lake Ontario. And then from Ontario into the St. Lawrence Seaway system, you step through a series of locks that eventually get you out into the Atlantic Ocean. Now, 1959 was the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway. Now, the St. Lawrence Seaway has encountered some issues, not the least of which was the introduction of invasive species into the Great Lakes. Unfortunately, there was not a lot of protection put in place early on in the Great Lakes to prevent ballast water from being discharged into the Great Lakes. That's not an issue today because there's a lot of protections in place for that. But unfortunately, a lot of damage has been done with the introduction of Asian carp, zebra mussels. A lot of them have done damage to the Great Lakes. Now, the season in the Great Lakes is always a little bit in flux. Used to be one of the stories that you get on the Edmund Fitzgerald from the famous Gordon Lightfoot story is that the gales of November were coming early and you were getting ready to see the lakes begin to shut down. Well, for the 2025 season, we see the closing date for this year to be January 5th for the Montreal and Lake Ontario section, with the Welland Canal closing right around January 10th. The Soo Locks typically stay open till about January 15th or till when last ship comes through the locks and then they close down. Now, that can change because of weather or other conditions, but right now looks like January 15th, 2026 for the Soo locks to close. And obviously the big reason for closures up on the Great Lakes has to do with ice. The Great Lakes are unique in that you have this ability of them to ice over. And when I say ice over, I mean ice over. This animation by NOAA takes you through the max ice for each year over the past roughly around 50 years, and you can see how many of the lakes will ice over completely. Light green is almost 100% max ice conditions, and it's really Michigan and Ontario that avoid most of the ice. However, a lot of the lakes will almost completely freeze over. You have cases here where Superior, Huron, and Erie will almost completely become blocks. Now, if you want to understand how operations work up on the Great Lakes, a couple of great sources I would recommend to you. Number one, the U.S. Great Lake Shipping Association, which serves all the major Great Lakes. The Lake Carriers Association also has a lot of detail. These cover mainly the big shipping firms that are out there. This comes from their annual report, The Laker. It shows you the 2024 cargo tonnage up. And again, this is for U.S. flag Great Lake carriers. So for 2024, they moved 78.2 million tons of cargo. That's a 3.9% decrease compared to 2023. The 2024 float was 2.1% below the fleet's 5-year average. And when you look at 2024, what are they carrying? Well, that's 78 million tons. Almost 44 million is iron ore. About 7.5 million is coal. 21 million is limestone. 3.5 million cement. 1.2 million is salt. That's a lot of margaritas there. 846 tons in sand, and a very small amount, only 312,000 in grain. This report talks about the economic impacts of maritime shipping in the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence region. It actually combines together American and Canadian data. They look at the data in a series of different ways. This one takes a look at the Great Lakes, the St. Lawrence River, all the way up until Montreal. And their numbers are from 2022. In 2022, a total of 149.5 million short tons valued at 26.1 billion US dollars moved through that region. A majority of the domestic cargo moving on Canadian and US flag vessels remain in the Great Lakes Seaway system. It creates an economic impact at the loading ports as well as at the port of discharges. All told, this generated roughly around $36 billion US in economic activity in the United States and Canada, employing roughly around 240,000 US and Canadian jobs, including 81,863 direct jobs. The maritime activity supported $17.8 billion US in total personal wage and salary income. Businesses involved in the activity spent about $8.3 billion in purchases and a total of $6.3 billion US in federal, state, provincial, and local tax revenue. Now, in the grand scheme of things, the Great Lakes region right down here is not a big sector in terms of shipping. However, for the United States and Canada, it is significant. This is a region that taps into trade in the heartland of the United States and Canada, and through the St. Lawrence system and through the inland system of the United States, we see that transportation head outward. One of the reasons you see Chicago develop as such a major port has to do with the fact that it taps in through the Illinois River into the inland transportation system that is the Mississippi River system. Same thing, the Great Lakes tap into the St. Lawrence, that access route out into the Atlantic. Now, it is a very long, laborious sea voyage to get into the Great Lakes from the oceans. You have restrictions due to the Welland Canal in terms of your length to get in. You've got to be under that set limit. One of the reasons why the Paul J. Martin, the 738-foot bulker, can transition down from Erie onto Ontario. So the Great Lakes definitely provides a key source of revenue and movement of goods for the United States and Canada. Should it be expanded? Definitely. We should definitely be investing in building new ships and enhancing the infrastructure. The Soo locks need to be updated. The entire lock system, both for the United States and Canada, need upgrades. And more importantly, we should be using this waterway system because, in truth, it provides a much more efficient, greener method to move cargo than any other, especially when we're talking about moving those commodities we talked about: coal, ore, sand, limestone, salt. You're not going to want to move those by train and road because, again, too bulky. You really want to get the cost savings by shipping. And I think if we want to remember what happened 50 years ago with the Fitz up on Lake Superior, what better way to commemorate this than perhaps a building program to revitalize and rebuild the shipping fleet up on the Great Lakes for the United States. The Ships Act does not really deal with inland waterway systems. It's one of the reasons I wanted to go before Congress and talk about this, because I think this is an area that does need a lot of attention. I was glad Senator Baldwin and other senators actually brought it up during the hearing. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, don't just support my page, but go on over, watch those documentaries on the Edmund Fitzgerald. Give a moment to think about the crew this 50 years later, and in particularly for their families. Those merchant mariners were doing their job that they do every day up on the Great Lakes. And Great Lake sailing, I'm not a Great Lake sailor. I sail deep ocean, so I didn't do the Great Lakes, but I have the most respect in the world for Great Lakes mariners. It is a unique environment. It's a different environment, and it is as dangerous as any other area in the world. One of the big things they always talk about is more ships are sunk in the Great Lakes than the Bermuda Triangle. And I can believe that. Having dived and been in some of the marine sanctuaries up in there, Alpena at the Thunder Bay, NOAA Maritime Sanctuary up on Lake Huron, and knowing some of the wrecks that are scattered around the Great Lakes, it is a rough environment to operate in. Until our next episode, Sal, sign off.